I made the difficult decision earlier this year to return to a cheaper apartment than the one I was leasing at the time, so I could augment my savings for a house. I'd never been partial to apartments in the first place, and if my ultimate objective was to get away from them entirely, I figured I'd do better living in a ramshackle one until I hit 35 than a middling one until I was 40. The result was moving into a 4-story complex with an online aggregate rating of 2.6 out of 5 stars. It had the least expensive monthly rate I could find in my area, and was still 1/10 of a point above average, I jokingly rationalized. Tenant reviews told me to expect the following. The building manager is always absent. Construction on the building across the street has been going on for months, which makes weird and bad smells for some reason. Maintenance woman is nice, but sometimes just won't show up to an appointment. Might lose hot water for up to 2 hours at a time. I've had to ask other tenants to be quiet at night, but they've always been respectful when I do. What sealed the choice for me was the apparent friendliness of the people in the building. Whatever other troubles might have arisen, as long as there was no face-to-face rudeness or antagonism, I figured I could contend with them. I moved into my first-floor 1-bedroom at the beginning of March. Over time, I found myself experiencing most of the problems described in the reviews, but on the whole, given the low cost of rent, I think I expected worse. The apartment itself was actually pretty roomy, especially for someone who lived as Spartan as I did, and armed with exhaust fans in the kitchen and bathroom, an air conditioner, and mountains of cleaning supplies, I never needed to deal with the maintenance people anyway. Things settled into a decent rhythm for me quickly enough. One morning, about 6 months into my lease, I woke up and found a piece of paper stuck through the side of my door. Contrary to my expectations, it wasn't some stock pest control or event notice, but a handwritten note. You don't know me, but I live down the hall. I'm giving you this to ask if you've noticed a bad smell recently, like worse than the usual around here. If not, don't worry about this and sorry for bothering you, but if you have, text the number below because there's more that I need to say. At the bottom of the paper was a phone number in the same careful print that composed the rest of the letter. Before anything else, I considered the question posed. Had I noticed a particularly bad smell recently? Truth be told, my instinctive answer was yes. Maybe 2 days before, I'd noticed the construction smell, but I'd become adept enough at minimizing the repulsiveness, immediately closing windows, closing doors, and staying in my bedroom for a half hour until it was just about gone, that it was hard to say whether that instance of it was especially bad or not. What then struck me was how oddly dramatic this letter was, what with its more that I need to say. On top of that, why did its author need to corroborate claims of a bad smell rather than just lodge a complaint with maintenance? In fairness, maintenance couldn't do much about construction across the street. The note was interesting, if strange. I mulled it over for about 20 minutes before texting the postscript phone number. The ensuing conversation read like this. Hi, this is room 106. I got your note. Short answer, yes, I'd say there's been a bad smell lately. I thought it was just the construction outside, though. Why did you ask me? Hey, thanks for responding. I was afraid of that. If it's okay, can we talk about this in person? I'm being really overly paranoid, but we shouldn't talk over a phone call. Okay. Are you here now? If you just knock on my door, I'll come out. You know the park down the street? Yeah, I do. Meet me there in an hour. Sit on the bench in front of the pond, or I will if I'm there first. And so, nearly 1 hour later, I was watching the bench in question from across the park, and sighing heavily. As recently as a few years before, these clandestine trappings of a spy movie might still have fueled a nostalgic childlike part of me, but by this point in my life, the exasperation of letting myself get dragged into something ludicrous had started to outweigh all that. This was potentially a practical joke, a ploy to get some random person to waste his time when he could have been working, which I would have found irritating, but surely forgotten in a week. It was a Saturday morning, so the park was plenty populated. There were multiple people within 10 yards of the bench, so there was no chance that someone was trying to kidnap or attack me. Worst case scenario, I'd have an uncomfortable run-in with someone whose mental state was, let's say, something other than typical. Having weighed these possibilities, I traversed the sunlit grass and sat down on the bench near the water. I then realized I hadn't exchanged names or any identifying details with this person and didn't know what to expect. Suddenly, the prospect of the meeting held a lot more menace. Cursing myself for the oversight, I looked left at the person nearest me. It was a casually dressed man about my age walking his dog, highly unlikely to be my correspondent. I looked to my right at a man who was large and imposing, but he was walking away from where I was. A couple minutes later, a woman who was probably in her mid-40s walked by without looking at me. 10 more minutes passed without anyone approaching. I texted the phone number again to let its owner know I was in the park, but got no reply. I was very close to cutting my losses and leaving, but then lifted my gaze to find a new figure at the park entrance, one walking purposefully toward me. The first thing I took note of was that this person was pretty small, maybe even a child. It was difficult to discern much else as they wore a sweatshirt with the hood pulled over their head and looked downward, obscuring their face. Still, whoever it was walked directly toward my bench. If this was indeed my meeting partner, I immediately had about twice as many questions as the already considerable number I'd had before. However, when the person had almost reached me, I saw that it was not a child. Not quite. I saw the face under the hood and saw that it belonged to a young woman, one whom I picked for being about 20 years old, her abnormally small stature aside. She stopped in front of me and lowered the hood, better revealing her features and lending more credence to my assumption. Something about the youthfulness of her appearance mixed alarmingly in my mind with the odd circumstances of our meeting, and a protective instinct I'd never felt before sprang up inside me. I took initiative and began the conversation myself. "So, I presume you're the one I was talking to. Why did we need to meet out here? Are there prying eyes inside? Or prying ears, I should say?" The girl looked left, right, and over her shoulder. Then she took a deep breath and began. "I didn't want them to hear us talking through the wall. They're right on the other side, and I don't know if they can listen to our phone conversations. I mean, we gave them our phone numbers after all. I tried to be as subtle as possible when I slipped the paper through your door because of the security cameras." She took a step closer to me and whispered, "I think they're hiding a dead body inside the air ducts." "You... what?" "I know it sounds crazy, but they are. I really think so." "A dead body? This girl was alleging a conspiracy that was totally in alignment with the paranoia of insisting on a covert rendezvous. Maybe I really was conversing with a mentally unstable person. "In the air ducts, yeah." "Okay, first of all, who's they?" "The maintenance people, they're the ones. I think it's probably above their workroom. The whole reason I contacted you is that I live right next to that room, and you live on the exact other side of it." That much was true. Apartment 106 was adjacent to the maintenance office. By my quick calculations, that meant this girl lived in apartment 104. The reason for my involvement had at least fallen into place, but plenty of other questions needed answering. "So you think that the smell we've had is because of a corpse inside the ducts, not the construction that's been going on?" I tried to keep the skepticism out of my voice. "Why would construction cause that smell? It's like rotting food." "I don't know, they're digging underground. Pipes and stuff." "Well, I didn't buy that when the smell went away faster when I left the windows open than when I closed them." The girl took to pacing back and forth. "And I started wondering, what if every time someone nearby turns on one of their exhaust fans, the air gets sucked in and pushed through the vents and forces the smell of something up there into other apartments?" I considered that for a moment. While it was technically possible, there was a flaw to the logic right from the beginning. But that's the thing. If someone had a dead body to hide, wouldn't the air ducts of an apartment complex be one of the last places to do it specifically because it would make the smell noticeable? You're right. The girl raised a finger at me as if she'd caught faulty logic of my own, and started rummaging in her pocket. Unless they were planning to move the body before anyone was likely to ask questions. She pulled out her cell phone, along with a pair of pink earbuds. She scrolled through something I couldn't see for a few seconds, then offered me the headphones. I saw what was clearly a camera recording with a grainy black image and knew instantly that the audio was the focus here. I tried to hear beyond the fuzzy room tone that was now playing in my ears.
But are you absolutely sure you can move it? When you finish work on Wednesday, that's 5 days. That's too long. How do you know nobody will...
From there, the voice trailed off. I scrubbed back through the recording to listen again while the phone's owner looked at me expectantly. The speaker was male and sounded like he was talking to someone else, but whatever that person was saying in response was completely inaudible. Though the sound was muffled and almost tinny, one thing came across very clearly. The distinguishable conversation partner spoke in a fraught, almost hysterical voice. I took out the headphones. What was the context of this? You heard it, what, through your wall? I was just in bed and I heard two people start arguing right in the next room. I couldn't hear everything, but from what I could, it kept sounding weirder and weirder, and I started recording right before they stopped. What else did you hear them say? Because that recording on its own, it doesn't prove much of anything. The girl's eyes darted around, as if trying to recall the memory. It was yesterday morning. One of them, the one that was easier to hear, just kept saying, "I can't believe you, I can't believe how stupid you are." And he asked, "Why up there?" Or maybe it was just, "Why there?" Well, which one? Why there or why up there? That makes a big difference. I don't remember, okay? She was starting to get frustrated, which made me realize I needed to stay a little bit calmer myself. Look, I don't know if you're right or not, but if there is something up there, or anywhere for that matter, keep in mind it might not be a body at all, because it sounds like that detail didn't ever come up in the argument you heard. Maybe they all hid a bunch of stolen edible goods or something. That could cause a bad smell too. The girl scoffed and started pacing again. I considered my next words carefully, knowing she wouldn't like them however they came out. I don't have all the experience in the world, but if I had to guess, I think the police wouldn't buy a word of what you're saying right now. Even with that recording, it doesn't prove or even necessarily hint at anything. Bad smells happen in apartment buildings all the time, and if the cops had to show up and search the air ducts of the whole first floor and who knows where else, they're just not going to do that. She looked at me and said pointedly, "But you think there's a chance I'm right?" I hesitated, but the intensity in her eyes made me acquiesce. Yes, I think there's a chance. I didn't clarify how big of one, but technically I wasn't lying to her. For a moment she looked vindicated, but her face quickly fell. "So you think calling the police is pointless? Then what do we do? I don't want to just go back in there and do nothing." I rubbed my temples. Wednesday, they said? Sounds like that's when they're going to get rid of the body. Or something. It's 4 days until Wednesday. You want my advice? Keep listening through your wall until then, and see if they get careless and talk about it again. Record as much as you can, and maybe you'll get something that'll make calling the police not pointless. The girl bit her lip uncertainly, but nodded. Sorry, we still don't even know each other's names. I'm Theo. Allie. Allie, thanks for trusting me with this. You're okay doing what I said? She looked heartened and said, "Yeah, I'm going to find a way to record sound through the wall without stopping. I'll tell you as soon as I find out anything, if I do." She nodded in goodbye and started to leave, but after a couple steps, she turned back around and gave me a hug. It was a brief but strong hug, a gesture in which I sensed relief and maybe even a little bit of excitement. As she walked away in earnest, I couldn't help but wonder if she was seeing herself in the third person, as a character in a narrative. As if to indulge her in that fantasy, I waited a few minutes before returning to the building myself, ensuring that our vigilante partnership remained a secret to those inside. Once back in my apartment, I quickly grew frustrated with myself, realizing just what ridiculousness I had leapt into, and what a non-solution I had provided. I had effectively bought myself 4 days until this girl insisted on calling the police, almost certainly with no new evidence to speak of, at which point I'd likely be implicated in what the cops would consider some kid's crackpot theatrics. That said, it wasn't as if I dismissed Allie's theory completely. The smell had been truly awful of late, to the point that I had previously joked to my family back home that my building apparently needed to extract dead cats on a daily basis. Not to mention, the argument Allie had recorded was pretty strange. Not just due to the words that were said, which could have referred to many perfectly innocent scenarios, but due to the genuinely panicked tone in which it was held. I was at a loss as to what innocent topics could be discussed that way. All in all, I was exasperated, but not disinterested. I pondered what else could be done to probe the truth of the situation. That evening, I went online to research missing persons in the area. I lived in a city, so there was a handful, but all of the cases were at least 3 months old. If there was, in fact, a body to be found, the culprit couldn't have killed the person more than a few days before the argument Allie overheard, and thus, there may not have even been a missing person report yet. I resolved to keep checking for new ones, just in case. The next day, I received a new text message from Allie, giving me the expected news that while she was perpetually recording audio next to her bedroom wall, she hadn't overheard anything of note since we disbanded. I could already sense restlessness in her words, which didn't bode well after just 1 day of biding time. I hoped I wouldn't have to keep her from doing anything unwise before we even got to Wednesday. Unfortunately, on Monday morning, we had the following text conversation. Theo, I'm still not hearing anything. Barely any audible voices at all, let alone anything useful. Just be patient. I'm trying to think of other things we can do. Well, I thought of something just now. Okay, what? We can go inside the maintenance room and look around, see what we find. I don't know. Can we even get in there? I'm 99% sure it's unlocked, so people can go in there and tell them about emergencies if necessary. We can just come up with some fake story and take the chance to see if there's anything incriminating in there. After reading that message, I had to put my head in my hand and massage my eyes. Once again, I had to wonder how I had gotten sucked into her machinations. And yet, it was a decent idea to help prove a not entirely implausible suspicion. I think that fact, the fact that I saw this girl as clever, as seeing things that others didn't, even if she was wrong, is what made me go along. What did I have in my life? I lived alone at 32 years old and worked a mediocre job from home out of a desire to eventually escape the soullessness of the city. But Allie had the conviction to sort out the injustice of the world. If she had been just a few years older, this whole thing might have felt like very unconventional courtship. But as it was, I just wanted to protect her. That protection, though, it wasn't just against physical danger, but against her ideas being invalidated, too. I replied to her with this. Listen, let's say you're right about everything. You're proposing we walk into a room where one or more murderers are hiding in plain sight. If anyone's going to do it, it'll be me, by myself. 2 minutes later, I was exiting my front door and walking down the hall where the door to the maintenance room lay in wait. During that short walk, the next door beyond my destination opened. Allie leaned out of it, giving me a scandalized look and beckoning me farther down the hall. Smiling in spite of myself, I shook my head at her and gestured subtly to the small orb-shaped camera mounted to the ceiling behind me. If she understood, she refused to duck back inside her apartment. I knocked on the maintenance door, and without waiting for an answer from within, I turned the knob and found the door opened easily. The first thing I saw was a large table with metal tools, plastic tubing, foam insulation, and half a dozen other things scattered on top of it. Behind a desk at the back of the room sat none of the maintenance workers, but the building manager, whom I had only met twice while moving in. Before I could say anything, I heard a chuckle from my left. Didn't want her to come in with you? I snapped my head to see a maintenance woman, probably a decade or so older than me, sitting in a swivel chair in front of an entire wall of television screens, each of them clearly displaying a different security camera's view. The security setup was in the maintenance room for some reason, and right on the centermost screen was the hallway just outside. This unwelcome surprise put me at a loss for a couple seconds. Well, she and I had been talking about something, but this has nothing to do with that. I needed to come in here first. I didn't realize that the maintenance here was also security. The woman got up and joined the building manager behind the main desk. It's not. We just use the same room to save money, and when the security person goes on break, I sometimes take a quick look. So what's up? I racked my brains to recall what I'd decided to say 2 minutes before. I, just saw a cockroach crawl out of my shower drain. I'd pour some Drano down there myself, but I don't have anything like that right now. The maintenance woman nodded with a smile. Of course, we've got bleach. Just give me 1 minute. She leaned on the desk, looking over the shoulder of the building manager, who stared at a computer screen. I suddenly remembered why I was even in this room, and started strolling around it, secretly on the lookout for anything that seemed out of the ordinary. Not that I had any clue what that would look like specifically. It certainly struck an odd image as a whole, the surveillance screens and accompanying equipment at the far side of an otherwise custodial room. It was also rather cluttered. Outside of the main table's contents, vacuums were leaned against a wall, their cords trailing into a supply closet. A big stack of boxes occupied one corner. Cleaning products littered the windowsills. Maybe they hadn't had time to clean up recently, due to extenuating circumstances. I walked back to the desk where the two women were. Either of them could have been the inaudible speaker in the argument Allie overheard, meaning, as far as the recording made it sound, the culprit of the hypothetical murder. I supposed it was more likely to be the maintenance woman, as I had no idea what the building manager was currently doing there. I listened to their conversation. "So these are all work orders?" the maintenance woman asked. "Yes, but in terms of scheduling, you'll want to take care of these 5 first. For these 2, I still have to figure out some stuff," instructed the manager. "What's up with those 2? "Well, I can't get into contact with one, and the other one I haven't tried yet, but he's late on his rent. Not looking forward to that." She trailed off and glanced up at me. I tried to look like I wasn't paying attention. At that moment, a phone rang. The building manager's cell phone, it turned out. "Hi, Adam, are you here? Good, I'll come meet you in a second." She rose from her seat and said to the maintenance woman, "Giving a tour. Take down these work orders and I'll get back to you about the other 2. She addressed me as she made to leave. "And we'll get that roach situation dealt with, 'kay?" I nodded and she closed the door behind her. The maintenance woman was now putting the information on the computer screen into her phone. Without looking up, she said, "Sorry, hun, just let me write these down and then we'll go." I knew I had only a few seconds, so I nodded once again and crossed the room as casually as I could. I pretended to gaze through the window behind the desk for a moment, then turned around to get a look at the computer screen. Peering at it as closely as I could without being too obvious, I could make out 7 numbers, which surely corresponded to the apartments where work orders had been placed. 2 of the numbers were asterisked, 109 and 213. I crossed the room again, trying to seem like I was simply pacing back and forth. The maintenance woman pocketed her phone. "All right, let me just get some bleach from the closet." "If it's easier, I can just do it myself. It's the simplest thing. I'll just pour half a cup or so." She looked over her shoulder while retrieving the bottle and said, "I'd let you, but technically I'm not allowed to. Let's get going." She led the way out of the maintenance room. In the hallway, I glanced over at Allie's door and was relieved to see the girl wasn't there anymore. 10 minutes later, and with an unnecessarily clean shower drain, I texted Allie about my discoveries. She insisted we meet in person again to discuss things, but instead of finding her at our park bench, she cornered me right in the parking lot of our building. I didn't think that was the best idea if we didn't want to be seen on camera together, but it was too late to say as much. She gave me a look of frustration. "I thought you didn't even fully believe me, and now you're going off and doing everything important by yourself? It might have been dangerous, Allie." "Well, what if I went off and did something dangerous by myself? What would you do?" I didn't really know what she wanted me to say, so I just went with honesty. "I'd probably try to stop you because you're too young to be doing something like that." Her irritation gave way to a smile, which she tried to conceal by looking away. I pressed on. "So listen, bad news and good news. I'll do the bad news first. One of the maintenance people saw us together in the hallway because the security setup is for some damn reason in the maintenance room. I couldn't tell if she was suspicious about that or not." Allie contemplated that, and then shook her head. "Whatever, I say. What's the good news?" "Good in our case, at least. There's one person in this building that the manager can't get into contact with, and it's possible there's another one because they're not paying rent. If someone got murdered and the body is inside the building, it's most likely one of those 2 people, apartments 109 and 213. Allie began pacing. And what do you think we should do? Just knock on their doors and see if they answer? Or better yet, I could slip notes through their doors too, something that would really provoke a response. Meaning that if we don't get one... I can't think of any better tactic right now. Just let me know once you've done it, I guess, and if either of them respond to you. It's not that long until Wednesday now, but maybe we'll figure something out. The girl hitched a look of resolve on her face and gave me a salute. Then she turned and walked along the perimeter of the building around to the front doors and disappeared back inside. As I watched her go, I felt relieved at how she seemed satisfied with her relatively innocuous task, and unsettled by how, for some reason, I was really starting to wonder if she was right about everything. As Monday wore on, I started listening at the wall of my own apartment, which bordered the maintenance room, not with the expectation of hearing anything significant, but merely by compulsion. Like Allie, I barely heard anything at all, let alone guilty-sounding voices. When I had a free moment between work assignments, I was tempted to go outside and try to pinpoint which of the building's windows lined up with apartments 109 and 213. Maybe I'd be able to detect signs of life from inside. Or maybe I wouldn't. Ultimately, though, I deemed the risk of looking like an honest-to-God stalker not worth it. I stayed inside the rest of the day. That night, Allie texted me again to confirm that she'd put notes through both unresponsive tenants' doors, but had as of yet not gotten a message from either. It was an imperfect experiment, of course. Allie told me the notes were essentially slight variants on the one she'd sent me, which the tenants might have found too odd to merit responses, or they may have genuinely been preoccupied for a while. Still, the fact remained that the more time passed with no replies, the more likely it became that nobody was inside those two apartments. When Tuesday dawned, clear and cold, I asked Allie for an update, but she said she had nothing new, which made me restless. I paced my apartment on a circuit that took me from listening at the wall to checking my phone to getting limited work done at my computer. For a few hours this lasted, until for the hell of it I left to knock on the doors of our suspected vacant apartments. I looked surreptitiously up and down the hallway and hoped nobody was watching me through the security cameras as I rapped on the door to 109. 3 loud knocks, and then I waited. And I continued waiting for 30 seconds, at which point it was clear no one was answering. I ascended a flight of stairs and stepped onto the second floor, just across from apartment 213. Another 3 knocks, and that door stayed firmly closed too. My mind now racing through other inconspicuous investigative measures I could take, I walked back down the stairs to the first floor. I emerged in a small corridor off the end of the main first floor hallway, and when I was halfway to turning back into that main hallway, I heard a door open around the corner. As I had been in the exact spot just 1 minute before, I was nearly certain that it was the door to apartment 109. My immediate instinct was to freeze and not let myself be seen, but I snapped myself out of it as fast as I could and proceeded down the rest of the end corridor, desperate to get a glimpse of who had just tried to trick me into thinking 109 was empty. Just as I turned the corner, I heard another door close, and I found the main hallway completely vacant. Whoever had come out of apartment 109 had swiftly gone through another door on the first floor. I had to assume that of the maintenance office, or the building managers on the opposite side. Who could have unlocked 109 but one of them? I wanted to tell Allie about this close call right away, but then I felt a wave of discomfort over how seriously I was suddenly taking this whole mystery. I chose instead to return to my apartment and take my mind off things for a while. That proved very difficult to do when I walked back inside and was met by a familiar, awful smell. It was oppressive as I sank onto my sofa, trying and failing to focus on anything else. Could something so unpleasant really be explained by something completely innocent? How could it be that only 2 people in an entire apartment complex were so perturbed by it? My thoughts started circling uselessly around themselves, and how much time passed after that was hard to determine. Finally, my phone buzzed, and I snapped to alertness. It was a message from Allie. Come to my apartment at 10 a.m. tomorrow. And so, 2 minutes before 10 on Wednesday, the day the supposed body was to be moved, it was apartment 104 I approached. I didn't need to knock this time. Allie swung the door open before I got there and ushered me inside. I started to tell her what I had, or rather hadn't, seen the previous day, not taking in the interior of her apartment at all, until I saw the screws, bolts, and metal tools lined up on her coffee table. What's all that? I asked hesitantly. I needed them for what we're doing today. She beckoned me into the kitchen, where an elaborate setup awaited me. 2 chairs were precariously stacked atop one another and placed in the center of the room, right below a square hole in the ceiling. The detached air vent and exhaust mechanism rested on the counter next to a long rope. It didn't take long for me to pick up on what she had in mind. No, are you serious? She made an indignant noise. What do you mean, am I serious? This is the only thing left we can do. You had to know it would come to this in the end. I tried to keep my voice even. What exactly are you thinking here? We go up there and crawl around until we find a corpse? Not we, just me. I'll go as far as it takes to find the body, and if it really is above the maintenance room, then that won't be far. I'll take a picture, and just in case I get stuck or run into something dangerous, that's why we have you and this. She pointed at the coiled rope on the counter. I'll tie it around myself nice and secure. You're stronger than me. You'll stay here with the other end of it, and you'll pull me back down if necessary. She looked at me seriously, like it was the simplest and cleverest plan ever devised. In that moment, I knew my indulgence of this observant and impassioned girl needed to end. Absolutely not, Allie. This is too far. Today's the day they're getting rid of the body. Allegedly. If you go up there, you could very well run into them, whoever the hell they are. That's the point of the rope. And besides, their plan isn't to do it yet. After work on Wednesday, that's why we're going up there ahead of them in the morning. What if they changed their minds? What if that argument didn't mean exactly what you think it did? Her face turned into a cold, angry mask. I'm doing this. Help me or don't, but I'm doing it. Otherwise, someone's getting away with murder. She was rooted to the spot, daring me to admonish her further. I walked over to the air duct entrance, which was just big enough for somebody to clamber inside, and peered into the impenetrable darkness beyond. Then I walked back to Allie. Fine. I'll do it, God help me. But wait here for a few minutes first. I have a harness in my apartment I want you to put on. That'll hold the rope much better. I pointed a finger at her. Do not do anything until I come back. Her face was still unreadable, but she nodded. I strode to the door and exited. Despite everything, part of me felt guilty over what I was about to do. Allie didn't deserve it. Nonetheless, it was not my apartment I headed for, but the building manager's office. The jig was up, as was inevitable. I didn't fully trust the building manager, but my suspicions about the woman were undeniably flimsy, and Allie was trying to put herself in danger. I'd tell the manager what was going on, we'd both return to Allie's apartment, stop her reconnaissance mission, and then call the police, regardless of what happened from there. I felt like I was waking up from some fantasy. But for the third time in less than 24 hours, I knocked on a door and got no response. I kept pounding and called through the wood in inquiry. Nothing. I jerked my head to the paper taped beside the door. Building manager hours. Weekdays, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. There was no earthly reason for her not to be there. I thought about barging into the maintenance room again, but stopped myself. That was a bridge too far. Furious, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and scrolled through my contacts while storming back in the direction of Allie's apartment. I re-entered, just about to press the button to dial the manager's number, but something stopped me. Allie wasn't where I'd left her. I cursed fluently under my breath, panic rising inside me as I ran through each room, looking around for the girl. She wasn't there, and I didn't need to think too hard to know where she'd gone. In a sudden trance-like state, I walked into the kitchen. I took note of the rope on the counter, Allie had left it behind, lest I pull her back down against her will. Then, my eyes were drawn to the gaping hole in the ceiling. In 2 minutes, everything had changed. Now it wasn't even a matter of whether I wanted to let Allie enter the metallic labyrinth. Now I had to enter it myself. If I couldn't reach her before something happened... I didn't want to think about such a contingency. I took a great lunging step up onto the stacked chairs. Just as I rested my hand on a sharp metal edge, I froze. An alternative had occurred to me. It was a risk, but it might have shortened my odds just a little bit. I jumped from the chairs. Seconds later, I burst into my own apartment with an armful of Allie's tools. As quickly as I possibly could, I stacked chairs in my kitchen like Allie had, and unscrewed the exhaust vent from the ceiling. I didn't know if what I was doing would be to my benefit, but as I worked, I reviewed the facts. Allie had gotten a decent head start on me, and she'd be heading in the general direction of the maintenance room, beyond which was my apartment, and the point in the ducts where I'd be starting out. I had a better chance of heading her off from the opposite direction than following behind her and catching up. As I detached the bulky exhaust mechanism, I reminded myself of that fact. It was all I could do at that point, and every second I hesitated was another that Allie might be in danger. I took a deep breath and hoisted myself inside the duct. It was cramped. I hit my head on the metal plane above me, trying to assume a crawling position. After shaking off the blow, I moved forward. It seemed as if the light from my kitchen was snuffed out an unnaturally short ways into the metal passage. Shoving my arm backward into my pocket, I thankfully found my cell phone. I squeezed my arm forward again and shook the phone twice, activating its flashlight. The sterile blue illumination showed me an approximate 20-foot passage ahead, with 2 paths extending from the left and one from the right. A quick mental image of the first floor told me I needed to turn left to be crawling in the direction of the maintenance room, and hopefully, Allie. I took the first of the leftward paths, moving awkwardly to keep the flashlight pointed in front of me, and was then staring down a much longer route with multiple new branches on both sides. I shuffled forward. It was only at this point that my olfactory sense caught up with my brain, and I realized that the awful smell, which had been lingering from the night before, was worse up here than it had ever been. I breathed through my mouth, which helped only just enough for me to keep moving. As I pushed onward, my heart pounded as if trying to break through my rib cage. The tiniest noise reverberated up and down the tunnel, and I strained to hear past my own cacophonous shuffling, feeling like I was among funhouse mirrors of sound. Knowing I was going generally in the right direction, I didn't want to make another turn until absolutely necessary. But I glanced down the next leftward and rightward options I reached, and what I saw halted me in my tracks. In both directions, there were pieces of cardboard, squares that were almost the exact dimensions of the air ducts, neatly placed to block the 2 paths. Despite my haste, I couldn't help but start down the left detour until I came within an arm's length of the obstruction. Worrying I was about to see the corpse that had plagued my imagination for days, I drew back and pushed the cardboard. It gave way easily. Nothing was behind it but another intersection of tunnels. Sinking into new depths of disquiet, I repositioned myself down the main path in ungainly fashion. Once I hit the end of that route, I chose arbitrarily to go right, intending to go left again as soon as possible. I was losing my sense of how far I'd gone. With every inch, I braced myself more and more to run into someone. Allie, hopefully. Somebody else if I was unlucky. After another few turns in quick succession, I'd seen even more cardboard, and the smell had grown even stronger. It's hard to say how I kept pushing ahead. Somehow, the thought of getting to Allie before something much more sinister did revealed depths of perseverance in me that I wasn't aware existed, and am not even sure I'd try to tap into again. Forward I crawled. Left hand, left knee. Right hand, right knee. The dragging of cloth and the soft pounding of metal followed every motion. And then, at the very edge of my senses, I heard that same sound coming from another direction, and moving fast. Adrenaline struck me like lightning. I needed to hide before anything else, and instinctively turned off my phone flashlight. The darkness was instant, and suddenly the shuffling noises, as well as my own heartbeat in my ears, seemed a lot louder. It was impossible to know how close this friend or assailant was in the dark, but I needed to confirm their identity. I hugged the left wall and inched ahead as silently as I could, until I dipped into a new branch of the path. Immediately, the smell was overpowering. I dropped my head, trying to steady myself. For a few moments, I was paralyzed, not knowing whether to listen for the noises down the tunnel or turn the flashlight back on. Against my better judgment, I decided on the latter. Giving my phone another shake, the light burst around me and gave relief to something that made me stifle a gasp, as unsurprising as it should have been by that point. A crumpled figure, bony and pale, was pushed unceremoniously against a dead end in the duct network. It looked like a middle-aged man, but the condition of the body made it difficult to tell his age for certain. He had deep gouges all over his arms and legs, a piece of duct tape over his mouth, and although I recoiled from him, I could not mistake the fatal stab wound he had through his heart. I wanted with all my being to turn away from this murdered man, but the narrow passage we occupied together didn't allow me to. I ingested the image of him for 5 unbearable seconds, long enough to notice the red markings around his mouth, as if the tape had been ripped off and reapplied. Only then did I remember how dire it was to conceal myself in the darkness and shut the flashlight off again. Crawling through those ducts facing forward was bad enough. Backing out of the dead end, unable to see, was an entirely different matter. Closing my eyes, for whatever difference it made, I scrambled back, and thankfully didn't collide with anyone. Once more, I crawled ahead, straining to hear the other person. The sounds seemed to get fainter as I moved. And then, I banged my head against the metal. Flailing my arms, I found that I'd unwittingly reached a 3-way intersection with paths to the left and right, but not forward. I stopped moving as fast as I could and listened to the now deafening silence. After 1 eternal second, I heard the shuffling again, to my right, and it seemed to be going at a very fast pace this time. All I could think to do was back up a few feet and peer around the right side corner. It was the only cover I could get. Seconds later, through that right-hand passage, I saw a flickering light flood the route parallel to mine. The other person moved down it with lightning speed, if the sounds were any indication. And then, I saw them for the briefest of moments, illuminated only by the spill light of the flashlight they were holding. Whoever it was wore baggy clothing, and some kind of opaque black mask. It almost looked like an oxygen mask, as a tube came out one side of it and passed over the crawling figure's shoulder, but I couldn't see the face clearly. They were moving faster than me, by a lot. I couldn't think where to go. I kneeled where I was until the strobing light grew more vivid again. They were coming back, and this time, with just a second to spare, I realized they'd turned down the passage I was looking through. I backed up as fast as possible, but the masked person was moving forward, and I couldn't get to a turn in time. The next moment, there was a light shining directly in my face. For the space of a second, the other person and I simply looked at each other, unmoving. But the light was too bright, and I couldn't see who it was behind the mask. They barreled toward me, and I moved back, thankfully finding a branch to the right, which I lunged through. That desperate maneuver put a little more distance between us, and I was also able to crawl forward again. Still, this person seemed rather familiar with the air ducts, and they'd catch up to me soon enough. I made a right turn and then a left one, and down that path I ran into another square of cardboard. Hearing the masked pursuer approaching, I thought quickly and punched through the obstruction, went beyond it, and replaced it so that it blocked me from view. This time I squeezed my entire body around to face the way I'd come. My heart was in my throat as I dimly saw the flashlight come closer, through the cardboard. As the masked person approached and I backed up a few feet out of fear, I felt myself run into something else. My foot was pressing against something odd, but by its size and the way it lolled, I recognized it as a person's head. I shuddered. Another body? This wasn't the same passage as the first one. It had to be a different person. The flashlight grew intense on the other side of the cardboard, and the thought fled my mind for the moment. I held my breath, seeing the beam of light shrink to a circle against the brown barricade, evidently just feet behind it. Then it moved on, and the shuffling of the masked person grew quieter again. I waited an agonizing few seconds and dislodged the cardboard again. Then I checked around the nearest corners and started in the opposite direction of the pursuer. I don't know how much longer I crawled, but eventually I turned and found a panel of light in the floor of the tunnel, an open vent in the ducts. Without another thought but to escape, I rushed up to it and plunged through it head first, landing on a kitchen floor a second later with an earth-shaking crash. I broke my fall with my arms the best I could, but they collapsed beneath my weight. If I'd broken any bones, it wasn't enough to overcome my adrenaline. I clambered up and bolted through the apartment, not taking any of it in, aside from somewhere in the back of my mind, the fact that nobody else was inside the place. I wrenched open the door and nearly ran into two people, the building manager and the maintenance woman, both giving me appalled looks. I opened my mouth to say something, but no sound came out. Only then did I take in my exact surroundings, and something dawned on me. I turned around and saw that the apartment from which I'd exited was none other than number 109. Apparently the police had already been called by that point, due to the banging sounds coming from above the maintenance room that were clearly human in origin. What followed was a blur, but I was taken by the police for questioning. My fear from the very beginning, ironically, though the reasons for that fear seemed infantile in hindsight, given what ended up happening. I was told the police had entered the air ducts from every possible entrance on the first floor of my building, and captured the masked person before whoever it was had had the chance to escape. The police also told me the two bodies I'd encountered had been recovered from the air ducts, though they related nothing more about them during my initial questioning. More than the fact that I'd been mere seconds away from death that day, the prospect of finding out who I'd touched with my foot while hiding from the assailant made my head sick with dread. The first body had belonged to someone I didn't recognize, but the second could have been anybody. It could have been Allie. That fear dominated my thoughts even more than finding out who the masked person was. As it turned out, while I talked to the police, the first piece of information that set alarms off in my head for a reason I didn't immediately understand was this. There were no men who worked in the maintenance room of my building. I wasn't under arrest, so I dwelled on what hidden truth that odd fact might have alleged back at the apartment that night. The smell was gone by then. The following day, I returned to the police station, where I was brought to a small room with multiple doors and informed of the masked person's identity. My subconscious had prepared me to hear something I really didn't want to, and I was therefore completely thrown when the police told me it was someone named Caitlin Wilkies. I told them I'd never met such a person. They ushered me through one of the doors and into a room with a one-way mirror. When they lit up the adjacent room, this Caitlin Wilkies was standing inside it by herself against the wall. The police asked me again if I had or had not ever seen this person, who was now winking at me and baring her teeth in a grin that said she wanted to see under my skin. Heart sinking, I turned to them and said, "Well, she told me her name was Allie." The two bodies I'd discovered did, in fact, belong to the former tenants of apartments 109 and 213, two men in their 40s. It never came up explicitly with the police, but it was not lost on me that the girl's 2 victims, and an attempted third, were all men much older than her. To overcome the difference in stature that put her at a physical disadvantage against her victims, though, she attacked them in the air ducts, where she could move around more easily than them. Everything beforehand was an exercise in getting them up there, one way or another. After interrogating other residents of the first floor, who had apparently never experienced the same bad smell that I had, the police determined that the cardboard blockages inside the ducts served Allie's purpose of specifically targeting me with the smell. It's difficult to summarize how these events have impacted my psyche, but I know I've touched on certain parts of the whole during this account. One thing that hasn't changed is my desire to buy a house. Maybe to isolate myself from people now as much as apartments in cities. But this apartment building is still the cheapest I can find by far, and terminating my lease prematurely would be a lot of money wasted. I still have 5 months to go, if I can find somewhere more suitable in that time. 5 more months of staring at the ceiling in my bed at night, knowing I was up there not long ago, and nearly didn't come back down. If I can fall asleep, I'll probably dream of a place that gets at least 3 stars.